by, in this case, campaign staff. Then the campaign staff works together with Secret Service agents who go out and conduct in advance. Generally, that is a 5-day time period where those discussions are had about what the perimeter is going to look like, what the size of the event is, what the venue is, and then from there, there is a request made to mitigate potential risk and threat. And I'm saying that on that day, the requests that were pushed forward were granted.
So the Secret Service did not know that the gunman actually had a weapon before President Trump was allowed to get up on the stage?
To the best of our knowledge and the facts that we have at this point, that is correct.
So can you answer this question, which I think is on the mind of most Americans thinking about this? How can a 20-year-old with his father's AR-15 assault weapon climb onto a roof with a direct 150-yard line of sight to the speaker's podium without the Secret Service or local police stopping him?
So again, sir, I will say we are 9 days out from this event, and I would like to know those answers as well, which is why we are going through these investigations to be able to determine that fully. Okay,
it's been reported that the shooter was not carrying a driver's license or any form of identification. They had no idea who he was, but then he was quickly identified, I think within 30 minutes, by using the serial number on the AR-15 under a tracing system that is now controversial. Some people say we should get rid of it. Some people want to keep it. But is that right, that the serial number was the key information which led to the identification of the shooter?
That is my understanding, sir, yes.
Okay. If an American citizen were just to stop you and say, Director Cheatle, we support your work to the tune of billions of dollars and thousands of employees, what went wrong? What would you say?
Again, knowing that we're 9 days out, I would say, as I have said from the very outset, I accept responsibility for this tragedy. We are going to look into how this happened, and we are going to take corrective action to ensure that it never happens again.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope you will act with vigor and focus and intensity, and it seems you understand the gravity and solemnity of this to the American people. Millions and millions of Americans don't feel safe with all the AR-15s out there. We thought at least the President of the United States or a former President of the United States would be safe, but now that's not even clear. Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, were you guessing or lying? The day after President Trump is shot, Secret Service spokesman Anthony Guglielmi said, quote, the assertion that a member of the former president's security team requested additional security resources that the U.S. Secret Service or the Department of Homeland Security rebuffed is absolutely false. The next day, Secretary Mayorkas said that is an unequivocally false assertion. We had not received any request for additional security measures that were rebuffed. But 5 days later, the Washington Post said this: top officials repeatedly rejected requests from Donald Trump's security detail for more personnel. The next day, the New York Times said this: Mr. Guglielmi acknowledged that the Secret Service had turned down some requests for additional federal security assets for Mr. Trump's detail. So which is it? Because both statements can't be true. Were you guessing or lying when you said you didn't turn down requests from President Trump's detail?
Neither, sir, and I appreciate the question.
Well, what were you doing? Because those statements don't jive.
So what I can tell you is that for the event in Butler, there were no requests that were denied. As far as requests...
Well, maybe they got tired of asking. Maybe you turned them down so darn much, they said, not worth asking. How many times did you turn them down ahead of that?
I think that it is important to distinguish between what some people may view as a denial of an asset or a request.
Well, is Mr. Guglielmi your spokesperson? He said he acknowledged the Secret Service had turned down some requests. I'm asking how many?
A denial of a request does not equal a vulnerability.
Well, tell me what it is.
There are a number of ways that threats and risks can be mitigated with a number of different assets, whether that be through personnel, whether that be through technology, or other resources.
Well, tell the committee which it was. They asked for additional help in some form or another. You told them no. How many times did you tell them no, and what did you tell them no to?
Again, I cannot speak to specific incidents, but I can tell you in general terms, the Secret Service is judicious with their resources based on...
What does some requests mean? How many times? Some indicate requests is plural. So more than once they asked for additional help and you turned them down. What did they ask for and how many times did you turn them down? Pretty basic questions.
So again, without having all of the details in front of me, sir, what I can tell you is that there are times...
You didn't get briefed on how many times you turned down the Trump detail when they asked for additional help?
I'm sorry.
You didn't get briefed on that before you came to this hearing knowing you were going to get asked that question?
What I can tell you is that in generic terms, when details make a request, there are times that there are alternate ways to cover off on that threat or that risk.
But that's not what he said. He said they were denied certain requests, requests. This is your spokesperson, not me talking. This is the Secret Service talking. And what a change from absolutely false, unequivocally false to, oh, by the way, there were some times where we didn't give them what they wanted. That's a huge change in 5 days. And the fact that you can't answer how many times you did that, that's pretty darn frustrating, not just for me, but for the country.
I hear your frustration.
Let me ask you this. Were any of those requests denied to President Trump's detail after you knew about the Iranian threat?
What I can tell you, again, I don't know the specifics, is that there are times when we can fill a request. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a Secret Service asset or resource. We can fill that request with locally available assets.
You spoke to anyone at the White House since July 13th?
Yes, I have.
Who'd you talk to?
I have briefed the President and the Vice President.
Talked to the First Lady?
No, I have not.
Talked to the White House staff? Anyone in the White House communications?
No, I have not.
Have you talked to the counter sniper who took the shot that took out the bad guy?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell us about that conversation?
I would not want to reveal conversations that I've had with my employees.
But that's exactly the kind of information the American people want to know. American people who pay your salary.
I understand. This is an ongoing investigation, and
Who's all doing the investigating at Secret Service? I know the Inspector General, but is there also an internal investigation in addition to the Inspector General?
We are conducting a mission assurance investigation internally, yes.
You know what it looks like, Director? It looks like you won't answer some pretty basic questions. It looks like you got a 9% raise and you cut corners when it came to protecting one of the most important individuals, most well-known individuals on the planet. A former president, likely the guy who's going to be the next president. Looks like you guys were cutting corners. That's what it looks like to me. Is that true?
I am here today because I want to answer questions, but I also want to be cautious.
You might want to, but you haven't answered, I don't think you've answered one question from the chairman, the ranking member, or me. Well, we got a lot of other people asking. We'll see if your record improves, but right now you haven't answered, I don't think, any questions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the summer of 1963, as a law student, I traveled to the South to work in the civil rights movement. When I arrived in Jackson, Mississippi, I was met by a civil rights activist who showed me around town and tried to convince me to work in Jackson that summer. I recall talking with him and his wife about the raw atmosphere in Jackson. Later that day, he took me to the bus station for my trip to my assignment. That night, he was assassinated outside his home. His name was Medgar Evers. I condemn the political violence. It is a threat to democracy. I want to discuss one of the roots of political violence, guns. For years, Republicans, including a member of this committee, have introduced legislation and amendments to repeal or block the District of Columbia gun violence protection laws, including its bans on assault weapons and large capacity magazines. The shooter at the Trump rally used the mass shooter's gun of choice, an assault weapon, specifically an AR-15 style rifle, and presumably a large capacity magazine, which is defined in DC as a magazine that can hold more than 10 bullets. Under current DC law, DC does not recognize concealed carry permits issued by other jurisdictions, but it does issue concealed carry permits to both residents and non-residents. However, DC imposes a number of requirements on concealed carry applicants, including suitability, such as not having exhibited a propensity for violence or instability. Moreover, DC residents restricts where the guns can be carried, such as a political demonstration near the White House and Naval Observatory, or near people under Secret Service protection, provided the permit holder has been given notice. This week, the House is expected to consider the fiscal year 2025 Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. This Republican drafted bill would allow an individual with a permit to carry a concealed handgun issued by a state or territory to carry a concealed handgun in DC, regardless of that jurisdiction's permit requirements. A Republican has filed an amendment to that provision to allow such an individual to carry a magazine of any size with that handgun. In short, the pending bill and amendment would allow any person with a carry permit issued by another jurisdiction to carry a concealed handgun with a magazine of any size in any location in the District of Columbia. The Secret Service is responsible for protecting a large number of people and facilities in D.C. Director Cheatle, would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people who have exhibited a propensity for violence or instability could carry a concealed handguns in D.C.?
I think being a Secret Service agent and an officer or a law enforcement officer in any state is difficult. They are required to make decisions and snap judgments in the blink of an eye. And I think that the officers and the agents that work here in the DC area do a great job of monitoring the public and reacting to threats as appropriate when they arise.
Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if people in D.C. could carry concealed handguns with large capacity magazines?
I think, ma'am, that we work in parameters where we travel around North America, and the rules on open carry and concealed carry are different from state to state, and that is part of what the Secret Service takes into account when we develop a security plan. Obviously, anyone that comes into one of our protective sites, we would establish magnetometer support, metal detectors that personnel would have to process through, eliminating that potential.
Would Secret Service protectees in D.C. be safer or less safe if more people could carry handguns in D.C.?
I think, again, as I stated, ma'am, we want to make sure that we provide a safe environment for all of our protectees, and whatever measures we would need to put in place for a secure site, we would do so.
I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Turner from Ohio.
Director Cheatle, your opening statement indicates that the Secret Service constructed a security plan for the site in Pennsylvania. I'm assuming that security plan would also include the security footprint for the site, but it also would be based upon a threat assessment for the threats associated with Donald Trump and the crowd in attendance. Would it not include a threat assessment?
Yes, it would.
So that threat assessment, as we know, basically would have started with, there's a generalized threat against Donald Trump because he is a presidential candidate. Then it would have gone to, he's a former president, and he gets security coverage just as Bush, Clinton, Carter, and Obama do. And then you also have the heightened political environment. Even for those, it's clear that the security footprint, that the threat assessment was insufficient, which permitted then a 20-year-old to actually enter with a weapon and shoot Donald Trump. But I want to ask you about two other aspects of the threat assessment. It is known and public that Iran is a threat risk for Donald Trump. They're a threat risk for John Bolton, former Secretary of State Pompeo, and Donald Trump, because they have indicated they want to assassinate them as a result of retaliation for the killing of Soleimani. That is both, for Iran, a generalized threat. They're targeting these individuals, but also most recently, a specific threat to Donald Trump himself. Now, I want to enter into the record by UC a Department of Justice Public Affairs release, a CNN article, an article from Fox News, and an article from CBS, all of which acknowledge
Without objection to order.
that this threat exists for Donald Trump from Iran, and that there are specific threats, most recently, that have been acknowledged. Director Cheatle, have you read the intelligence of the generalized threat to Donald Trump by Iran as a result of their desire to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani?
I have.
Have you read or been briefed about the intelligence of the specific recent threat to Donald Trump from Iran?
Yes, I have.
Director Wray, when we were getting our briefing, indicated that he thought the threat assessment should have included this threat from Iran. Is it your testimony today that the threat assessment, since you've read this intelligence, was sufficient to protect him from this threat from Iran?
My testimony today is that the information that we had at the time was known.
Was it sufficient? Director Cheatle, was it sufficient for the Iranian threat that you said you have read the intelligence briefings for?
That information was passed to...
Well, I'm not asking the bureaucratic issue of who did it get passed around to. Director Cheatle, was it sufficient for the specific and generalized threat to Donald Trump's life from Iran?
Yes, I do believe it was.
Director Cheatle, is an Iranian assassin more capable than a 20-year-old?
Sir, I think we've acknowledged that there was gaps and a failure that day.
When I raised this issue with Director Wray, he was incensed. He was shocked that the threat assessment of Iran did not seem to be, as we and I discussed, baked in to your security footprint and your threat assessment. And he went on to say that the generalized threat that he has told the whole country that we are under from a potential terrorist threat. He has said we're under the highest threat level since 9/11, that the lights are flashing red. And he has specifically indicated that people have crossed the southern border as a result of the Biden administration's policy, and that there are in our country today terrorists and individuals who are affiliated with terrorist groups and organizations. That would be a heightened threat environment, Director Cheatle, would it not?
Yes.
In his public statements, he has said he is making these statements because he wants people to take them into consideration in threat assessments, specifically. Now, that would be a threat not just to Donald Trump, but it would also be a threat to the crowd there, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Are ISIS terrorists and Al-Qaeda terrorists and international groups and terrorists more capable than a 20-year-old in pulling off either a mass shooting or an assassination of Donald Trump?
Sir, again, there was clearly a breakdown and a failure that day.
Have you read the intelligence of the terrorists that are currently in the United States that Director Wray speaks, and those individuals that are here that are affiliated with terrorist groups and organizations that are in the process, as Director Wray said, of representing a significant threat of a terrorist attack occurring in the United States?
I have read reports that apply specifically to the Secret Service's mission.
Director Cheatle, because Donald Trump is alive, and thank God he is, you look incompetent. If Donald Trump had been killed, you would have looked culpable. There is no aspect of this that indicates that there has been any protection to Donald Trump. The threat was identified before he took the stage, and the shooter was only killed after Donald Trump himself was killed. Not only should you resign, if you refuse to do so, President Biden needs to fire you, because his life, Donald Trump's life, and all the other people which you protect are at risk because you have no concept of the aspect that the security footprint needs to be correlated to the threat. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cheatle, there were multiple security failures at the former president's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. First of all, there was a failure to isolate the podium from exposure to direct fire. Do we know who made that decision to allow that rooftop to remain as an unprotected area? Do we know who came up with that security plan that omitted that?
Sir, I don't have a specific person to identify for you.
Okay, well, that's what I'm looking for, so let's move on. There's also a breakdown in security in failure to confront the shooter over an hour before the former president began his remarks, when the shooter was identified as a person of interest. What particularly allowed agents or law enforcement to identify him as a person of interest?
So I appreciate the question, and again, I will say that we are 9 days out, and there are a multitude of interviews that are still taking place.
Okay, so did he have a rangefinder? There were some reports that the individual had a rangefinder. That would certainly raise my suspicion. Did he have a rangefinder?
Yes, he did, but may I explain that at a number of our sites, especially when you're at outdoor venues, a rangefinder is not a prohibited item. It is sometimes an item that is brought in by individuals if you're going to be in the back.
Did anybody confront him on that? Anybody ask him questions? What are you doing with the rangefinder? Anybody confront him on his presence where he was in proximity to the president?
So again, to my knowledge, I believe that was the process that was taking place, was to locate the individual.
Did they confront him? Did they go up to him? Did they talk to him?
I do not have those details at this time.
Those are important details. There was also a failure to communicate between law enforcement to act quickly upon information provided by either local law enforcement or rally attendees that the suspect was positioned on the roof. There were minutes of delay before any meaningful action was taken, even though he was several hundred feet from the podium, and this was obviously minutes before the shooting. Let me ask you, there was considerable delay in removing the president from the podium after the shooting began. He got shot in the ear. It was still over a minute before he was removed from the stage. Meanwhile, this shooter had multiple clips, several clips. He got off 8 shots, and he had the capacity and the ability, if he was not neutralized, to basically mow down that whole Secret Service detachment as well as the president. What, from your own investigation, caused that delay under the circumstances?
What I can tell you is that when the agents identified that the shooting was taking place, in under 3 seconds, they threw themselves on top of the president.
I understand that. There was heroism there. No question about it. No question about it. But protocol would indicate, and these are the opinions of various former Secret Service agents, people who have done this work in the past, that over a minute of exposure on that podium with a shooter with a high-capacity weapon who had already wounded the president and could have got off, we don't know how many more rounds, and yet the president remained exposed, even though he was joined in that exposure by the Secret Service in their heroic acts. It just, I don't know if there's a good explanation for that.
Our personnel created a body bunker on top of the president.
I get that.
Shielding him.
Yeah, this was an AR-15 style weapon that would have made pretty quick work if he was determined and able to do so. This is not the first investigation that we've had of the Secret Service during my time here on this committee, and the last one we had, our previous investigation determined that the Secret Service was experiencing a staffing crisis that poses perhaps the greatest threat to the agency, and that's a quote. Is that staffing crisis still in place? Is that still something that you deal with on a daily basis?
As of today, the Secret Service has just over 8,000 employees. We continue to hire, knowing that we need to ensure that we keep pace with
what would be the full complement of
And gentlemen, time's expired, but please answer the question.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
What would be the full complement that you're looking for? You've got 8,000, and how many would be a full complement for for the service.
So we are still striving towards a number of 9,500 employees approximately in order to be able to meet future and emerging needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cheatle, what grade would you give the Secret Service's performance in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13?
As I've stated, ma'am, this was clearly a failure. I would grade the agents and officers who selflessly threw themselves in front of the president and neutralized the threat an A. I think that we need to examine the events that led up to and prior to that day.
You stated in 2021 that the Secret Service has a zero-fail mission. It's clear that the events of July 13 show a cascade of failures that cost Corey Comparator his life, nearly cost former president his life, and injured David Dutch and James Copenhaver. When an agency fails spectacularly at its mission, those responsible must be held accountable, and the problems must be fixed so they cannot happen again. Why should the American people or the officials you're responsible for protecting have confidence in your ability to lead the Secret Service after such a spectacular failure?
I appreciate the question, and I am committed to finding answers so that we can make the agency stronger after this.
You said on July 15 that the buck stops with me. How are you taking accountability for the Secret Service's failures during the July 13 assassination attempt on President Trump?
I have taken accountability, and I will continue to take accountability. I am responsible for leading the agency, and I am responsible for finding the answers to how this event occurred and making sure that it doesn't happen again.
So I would like to explore how you got the job as director of the United States Secret Service. Is it typical for the director of the Secret Service to be recommended for the role at the behest of a president's family and senior staff, perhaps at the request of Jill Biden or Anthony Bernal?
I got the job as a director of the Secret Service because I spent 27 years in an agency with a mission that I absolutely love. I started my career in Detroit. I worked my way up through investigations and protection.
Was there competition for the position?
You would have to ask those who were involved in the interview process.
But you think you are the best person in the country to head the Secret Service?
I think that I am the best person to lead the Secret Service at this time.
The Secret Service receives billions in funding each year, as has been explained by my colleagues here. In fact, you've had an increase in real terms of 55%. As you're no doubt aware, staffing levels for those assigned to protect the president, former presidents, and other senior officials has decreased by about 350 between 2014 and today. Clearly, a lack of financial resources not to blame for the staffing shortage. In 2022, the Secret Service saw nearly half its workforce leave in 1 year, and during the same year, it was ranked dead last among law enforcement agencies in the best places to work in the federal government. Can you explain why your agency was so poorly rated and why so many staff left in just 1 year?
So with all due respect, I dispute the statistic of half of the employees leaving in 2022. I think that has been inaccurate data that's been reported out there. But what I can tell you is, as I have returned as the director of the agency, we have had an increase in hiring and staffing and an increase in resources, and we are committed to continue to hire so that we can be staffed appropriately to meet the dynamic mission that we have.
Well, you may want to dispute it, but it's out there. My understanding, given the high-profile failures and rotten culture at the Secret Service during your nearly two-year tenure, why should the American people have any confidence in your ability to lead the Secret Service to perform its zero-fail mission to protect our senior leaders?
The Secret Service has an incredible culture. Our men and women place service over self. They come in every day willing to risk their lives for our protective mission. And they work investigations that thwart people who would do harm to children, child exploiters. We have an incredible mission, and our culture is we will get the job done no matter what.
Well, those on the front line certainly have a great culture, and they were willing to risk their lives for President Trump. But I'm not sure the leadership at the agency has this right kind of culture. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Conley from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I hope the American people do appreciate the incredible daily risks Secret Service agents take on our behalf. You mentioned there are 36 regular clients you've got that you protect constantly, but I was participating in the NATO summit just 2 weeks ago. We had 32 heads of government and heads of state, plus visiting heads of state and heads of government. Presumably, you provided protection for all of them.
That is correct.
Just saying. Help us understand, however, I will stipulate that there's an ongoing investigation. You don't want to go into too much detail on that until you've been able to ascertain all the facts and analyze what they mean. You can understand, however, the anxiety we and the American public have about how could this happen and how can we ensure it can't recur. Now, there are some things my friends on one particular side of the aisle don't really want to talk about, like AR-15s and access to them by a 20-year-old, or anybody for that matter. Presumably, Director Cheatle, the ubiquity of weapons, guns in America, especially assault weapons or semi-automatic weapons, that's helped your job and the mission of your agencies, right? It's made it less complicated, isn't that true?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question.
Real simple. More guns, especially dangerous ones, have made your job protecting people easier. Is that not right?
I think from every
Director
state-
Cheatle, this is simple English. More guns, do they make your job more complicated or less complicated in protecting these 36 clients and visiting heads of state and heads of government that come to Washington?
I think the Secret Service needs to take into account
I didn't ask that.
that they're in.
I'm sorry. I asked a simple question, which deserves a simple answer. The ubiquity of guns, dangerous weapons in America, like AR-15s, has that made your job, that is to say the mission of the Secret Service, easier or more difficult?
I think the threat environment for protecting our Secret Service protectees is always difficult, and that's dynamic, and it's always evolving.
We stipulate it's always difficult. Again, this is a simple one. Does the ubiquity of guns make your job easier or more difficult today?
I understand the Second Amendment rights of individuals.
I didn't ask that question. I'm not questioning the Second Amendment. I'm asking a simple analysis, Director Cheatle. And I can tell you, you're not making my job easier in terms of assessing your qualification for continuing on as director. Please answer the question. You're the head of the Secret Service. You're speaking on behalf of 8,000 members who put their lives on the line. We just had a failure by your own admission. Do guns make your job easier or harder?
I think the job of the Secret Service is difficult on every day, and we need to make sure that we are mitigating all threats, whether that be
That
weapons,
isn't my question.
personnel.
That is not my question. And now I think you're evading the answer, which is not a hard one.
I am sorry that you feel that way, sir.
How else could I feel, Director Cheatle, when you're clearly avoiding a direct answer to a very simple declarative question? We almost lost a presidential candidate the other day. A 20-year-old had access to his father's AR-15 and got on top of a roof within 500 yards or feet of the podium. And I'm asking you, did the availability of that AR-15, which is replicated all across America, make your job harder or easier? And you're not willing to answer that question? And you think, and you wonder why we might have a lack of confidence in your continued ability to direct this agency?
I understand your question, and that's the environment.
Well, if you understand my question, why not answer it?
Because it's the environment that the Secret Service works in every day.
That doesn't tell me anything. That's the environment we work in. I had an attack on my office a year ago. I know a little bit about violence too. He came to kill me. When he couldn't, he beat one of my staffers 8 times with a baseball bat on the head. We live with the threat of violence. But a simple answer from the director of the Secret Service would be helpful. And I'm sorry you've chosen to evade it. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Grofman from Wisconsin.
Thank you. When this guy took the shots, he climbed a ladder to get on the roof, correct?
I'm unable to answer details of exactly how the individual accessed the roof at this time.
Do you know when if he did use the ladder, do you know when the ladder was placed there? Was the ladder there 2 days before, just the night before? Do you have any information at all as to when the ladder got there?
I would like to be able to answer those questions. The FBI is still conducting an investigation.
How did the rifle get to the roof?
Again, sir, at this time, I'm unable to answer questions to provide clarity.
Have they cleaned the roof since the assassination attempt?
Have they cleaned the roof?
Right. Has anything been done to the roof? Is it just like it was, 10 days ago, or not? Has anything been done to the roof?
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. Were President Trump's normal agents normally assigned to him there that day?
Yes.
These were the same agents that were always there?
Yes, sir.
Correct.
The people that are assigned to his detail were working on that day.
Okay, there's stuff on the internet that says they were not there that day, but these are the same agents who are routinely there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we know which agents fired the shots that finally took down the potential assassin?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you give us those names or background of those agents?
I would not offer their name up in this setting, but it was one of our technical officers, our counter snipers.
Okay, so can we privately get those names?